Hello everyone, my name is Leah Wolf and I work with the Peace Dealer, and today I am going to be talking about the astrology of the events that have happened in relation to Anthony Rapp and Kevin Spacey. For those of you that don't know about what's going on, this has been in the news and it's been a big story the last couple of days. Anthony Rapp is an actor who works on Broadway, but he was also a child actor that worked with Kevin Spacey approximately 30 years ago in 1986. Anthony Rapp claims that, he claims that Kevin Spacey attempted to have sex with him 30 years ago in 1986. And he's coming out about this right now during Scorpio season. And Kevin Spacey did respond to this. And Kevin Spacey, admits that he's had romantic encounters with men in the past, and he deeply apologized, but claimed that he did not remember this as it was 30 years ago. And he kind of, made a mixed message of, apologizing and not admitting, but, Anthony has made these allegations, and Kevin now wants to live as a gay man, and he has come out to talk about that during this time. So Anthony Rapp was born October 26, 1971 in Joliet, Illinois. Currently there is not an exact birth time, however, I'm in the process of tracking that down through my connections. The interesting thing that I first noticed when I started researching Kevin Spacey and looking at his and Anthony's charts together and looking at their synastry, looking at their Davison composite, and I also looked into the synodic astrology cycles that affect them, the first thing I noticed is that Kevin Spacey was born within a Venus retrograde shadow period. It was in 1959. And it happened about 14 days after he was born. So he was born within the shadow period of the Venus retrograde in Virgo of 1959. So that's a very important thing to take note. And for those of you who watched my Venus retrograde video on the shadow period, you may understand how this relates, and I will explain that. Venus retrograde, Venus has a lot to do with Venus retrograde has a lot to do with secrecy and sexual issues, and it's just very interesting to me as an astrologer that Kevin Spacey has this Venus retrograde shadow period in his chart. So I'm going to look at their charts right now and give you an idea, some exact information of what's going on, because I've done a lot of research, and I may even have to do a part 2 for all the information that's come out that I have found. So what really strikes me interesting about Kevin Spacey and Anthony, so because Anthony Rapp does not have a birth time, I've put him on the outer wheel for compositing him and Kevin, because we do have an exact time of birth for Kevin Spacey. So Kevin Spacey is a Leo rising, and Anthony Rapp's natal south node is in Leo 10 degrees. Kevin Spacey's rising sign is Leo at 2 degrees. So Anthony Rapp's south node in Leo is conjunct Kevin Spacey's ascendant with a 8-degree orb. So it's not a very tight conjunction, but it's still conjunct. It has that 8-degree orb at 10 degrees to 2 degrees Leo. The other thing that's interesting about this is that Anthony's south node in Leo is conjunct Kevin Spacey's Uranus in Leo, and his Mercury in Leo, and his Sun in Leo. It is conjunct his Sun within an 8-degree orb, 10 to 2 degrees Leo, and his south node at 10 degrees Leo is conjunct Spacey's Uranus in Leo, that's at 15 degrees, and his Mercury in Leo that is retrograde at 18 degrees. The interesting thing about nodes are amplifiers. Nodes serve as special points in the chart that amplify situations. They can really magnetize things, especially when they conjunct certain points. And in this case, in their synastry, Anthony's north and south nodes are in his 1st and 7th house. So, and the interesting thing is that his north node is 10 degrees Aquarius, conjunct Kevin Spacey's descendant in Aquarius. with an 8-degree orb again. So that is one thing I noticed that I thought was very interesting. And the reason I find the South Node to be very interesting is South Node has a lot to do with your past karma, past life issues. The South Node can be messy situations coming out. It can, people's South Node issues can get them into trouble sometimes, depending upon the transits. And I find it very interesting that Anthony's South Node is in there. And I think a transit like that is kind of demanding Kevin Spacey to take a look at himself. And how interesting is it that Kevin Spacey really comes out and talks about wanting to live as a gay man after Anthony brings these issues up. So that's an example of how that could be impacting him. It's making Kevin Spacey come out and think about that. And the other thing about Kevin Spacey that is interesting is that, you know, Kevin Spacey's been known as being a very private person. He's secretive. He doesn't like to talk about his personal life or his personal relationships all that much. And there's a reason for that. If you look at the astrology of Kevin Spacey's chart, you will notice that Kevin Spacey's Sun is square his Neptune. Kevin Spacey's Leo Sun in the 1st house is squaring his natal Neptune in the 4th house with a 2-degree orb, and that's in a square. And also, Kevin Spacey has Chiron in the 8th house of sex, death, and rebirth. Now, the 8th house is naturally ruled by Scorpio, and that 8th house Chiron is 26 degrees Aquarius, and it is squaring his Jupiter in the 4th house at 22 degrees Scorpio. So there's that fixed square right there with the 8th and the 4th house, and then there's another square with Jupiter at 22 degrees Scorpio squaring his natal Mercury in the 1st house that's at 18 degrees Leo. So he's got 2 fixed squares and a T-square, and the apex is at Jupiter, which is in the 4th house. Now the 4th house is a heavy karma house. It has to do with your home, your family, your ancestry, but it's a very important house, and it's interesting that the apex is there. And from what I'm gathering, if this incident did occur with Anthony and Kevin, it could have occurred in a home or at a hotel, potentially. We don't know for sure, but I'm speculating. And, you know, something that I noticed that really came to me when I looked at this, I came to make a prediction of something that I noticed. So my prediction is that Anthony Rapp likely, if this encounter did occur, my prediction is that the encounter likely occurred during the Venus retrograde in Scorpio. And there's a reason why I think that. And the reason why I think that is because when Venus went retrograde in Scorpio back in, let's see, let me look right here. I just want to get the exact. It was in fall of 1986. When that happened, let's see. So I have my ephemeris right here again. So I'm taking a peek. So October of 1986, Venus went retrograde in Scorpio on the 15th of October. So that whole month Venus was in Scorpio, and it was in shadow for that retrograde, but it went retrograde on Wednesday, the 15th of October of 1986. So my prediction is that it's possible that if this did occur with Anthony and Kevin, that it happened in October of 1986. That's why I think that could have definitely happened. And the reason I think that is because Anthony natally has Venus in Scorpio in his chart, and that Venus retrograde was his Venus return, and the day that it went retrograde, it was exactly conjunct his Venus to the degree, 0-degree orb exact. So that was very interesting to me. Another thing that I want to talk about Anthony Rapp's chart a little bit. So Anthony Rapp, we don't have his birth time, but I can tell you his basic placement. So Anthony Rapp has a Sun in Scorpio and a Capricorn moon, and he has Venus, Mercury, and the Sun all in Scorpio. Scorpios can keep a secret for a long time. And his Uranus is 15 degrees Libra, and his Pluto is at 0 degrees Libra as well. You know, transiting Venus was at 0 degrees Libra on October 15th, 2017. And that transiting Venus in Libra at 0 degrees was hitting his Pluto in October. And during that time, around October 15th, a lot of stuff was coming out in the media about Harvey Weinstein. So my sense is that, you know, everything that's been going on with Harvey Weinstein and all these sexual assault cases coming out in public within Hollywood has probably really been affecting him on an emotional level and kind of planting the seed to give him courage to start speaking. And that's where I really feel the current transit of Jupiter in Scorpio is so powerful, and it's really affecting the Hollywood community right now. You know, Jupiter is the planet of expansion. It relates to expansion. It's traditionally ruled by a fire sign. And Sagittarius. It is ruled by Sagittarius, a fire sign. And, you know, when Jupiter is in Scorpio, it's bringing about Scorpio themes of sex, death, rebirth, and secrets. And Jupiter is expanding on that. It is helping expose those secrets on a greater level and all of society is watching, and it's listening right now to all of this. And people are outraged. They're very upset about this. In the last couple of days, the moon has been in Pisces while this has been covered. And I think with the moon being in Pisces, that adds an extra emotional flavor to how people are feeling about this. People just seem to really be heartbroken about this whole thing with Kevin Spacey, as a lot of people really are huge fans of his, and he's considered a beloved actor to many people. So, you know, a lot of people are quite upset and have told me so themselves. So, the other thing that's interesting to me is that transiting Venus hit Anthony's natal Uranus on October 27th of this year, 2 days before he came out with his interview on the 29th of October. So, you know, this October, Anthony's had some pretty big transits with these Libra planets, this transiting Venus in Libra, hitting his natal Pluto and hitting his, and then with transiting Venus hitting his Uranus and his Pluto. That, I think, has really brought it out because, you know, Uranus is the planet of unpredictability. Uranus is the planet that brings about change. Uranus can be chaotic, but it can also be brilliant because planets, they have their dark and their light sides to them. And in this case, I really feel like this Uranus transit for Anthony is really shaking him up and making him think about a lot of things. And this has been really big for him. I think that right now, you know, Anthony has had some difficult transits throughout this year. If I was to predict, I don't think it's been an easy year for him on a personal level. Just guessing by looking at his chart. Can I know that for sure? No, because I don't personally know him. But from an astrological level, looking at what's going on, I think he's had a rough time. So we don't know Anthony's rising sign, as I was saying, because we don't have his birth time, and I am on the hunt for his birth time, and when I find it, I will most certainly share it on YouTube. So it'll just be really interesting to see what happens on an astrological level when Venus goes into Scorpio, and if more people make allegations towards Kevin Spacey. I'm interested to sit back and see what happens when Venus goes into Scorpio. So those are some things I've noticed. You know, Kevin Spacey has some interesting transits going on right now, and I'm going to pull up his chart and show it to you guys so you can see yourself. So Kevin Spacey, you know, right now the moon and Chiron are conjunct, and they have been transiting. It's transiting in his 9th house right now, and pretty soon that's going to hit his, he's going to have a lunar return quite soon in Aries. Briefly, and then the moon will go into Aries in about a day, and it will hit his south node in Aries. And that will be interesting because, as I was saying, the nodes are amplifiers, and the moon is a light. It's going to really magnify things, and it's going to be at his midheaven. And currently right now, Kevin Spacey has transiting Uranus has been conjuncting his natal moon in Aries. His natal moon in Aries is at 19 degrees and transiting Uranus is at 26 degrees. So yes, it's a loose conjunction and it's separating right now, but the planet Uranus goes direct and it goes retrograde, and when that planet goes retrograde, it will be applying onto his moon again, and the transit will be intensifying, and he will go through another hit for that conjunction, and it's at his midheaven. And your midheaven in your chart, in a person's chart, has a lot to do with their reputation. And in this case, his moon is in his 10th house, and he has a very public career because the 10th house is naturally ruled by Cancer, and Cancer is not only about the home and mothers and the moon, it also relates to the general public, and the general public is watching him right now, and transiting Uranus is on his moon, and his moon is at his midheaven, which is a lot to do with how he is seen by the public. It has a lot to do with his career, and Uranus is a rabble-rouser. Uranus shakes things up. Uranus can be chaotic, but Uranus brings about change, and I really feel that this Uranus to his moon transit could be doing that to him, and it could be part of what's playing out in this situation. So I'm also going to start talking more about... I also want to talk about the day that Kevin Spacey made his Twitter response, and that was on October 29th at 9 o'clock. And what I did was I put the exact time in the response on top of his chart, and I checked the transits for that day when he came out publicly about this. And on that day, let's take a peek. The moon and Neptune were in his 8th house, and the 8th house, as I was saying, has to do with sex, death, rebirth, and change, and it's naturally ruled by Scorpio. Jupiter's in Scorpio right now, so this is where rulership's coming in a little bit. So yes, currently the moon at the time was in Pisces, and Neptune's in Pisces, and they're in a loose conjunction right now with a 9-degree orb because Neptune is at 11 degrees Pisces and Chiron is at 2 degrees. Chiron is 11 degrees Pisces and the moon is 2 degrees Pisces. So that Neptune and Chiron are conjunct in a loose orb of 9 degrees, and it was in his 8th house. The 8th house is also about secrets because it's ruled by Scorpio. So it's sex, death, rebirth, and secrets. And the moon is a light and it is amplifying that. So it's very interesting that this is going on. And the other very interesting thing to me about this whole situation is that it occurred while the moon was in Pisces. And the reason that's so interesting to me is that I ran a Davison composite between Anthony and Kevin, and lo and behold, they have moon in Pisces and Saturn and Chiron all conjunct in Pisces in his 12th in the 12th and 11th house of the Davison composite. So this transit is a mirror transit. A mirror transit is when somebody has a transit in their synastry, and then when a big event happens, the same exact transit repeats itself. And in the case of Kevin and Anthony, this has occurred with the moon being in Pisces. It's a lunar return for their Davison composite. So that's very interesting to me. That marks a cycle, and the moon is a very cyclical kind of planet. It's always ebbing and flowing and waxing and waning, and it's always in flux. It doesn't stay in one sign for very long, and in this case, there's, all the odds it happened at this time. Timing is not an accident sometimes in astrology. The other thing that interests me is that I'm looking at the chart right now. The other thing that really interests me about the 29th of October of 2017 is that the day that Kevin Spacey came out and wrote this message, transiting North Node in Leo was conjunct his Mercury retrograde. Now, people with Mercury retrograde natally, they don't always communicate in the most direct way. They may apologize in a roundabout way, or they may speak a half-truth, or just their way of communication is a little bit different from other people. Some people really struggle with their communication when they have natal Mercury retrograde, and I just think it's interesting that the North Node was conjunct his Mercury in a 3-degree orb on the day that he came out and talked about this. And if you look at the nature of what he wrote and what he said, I think it reflects that Mercury retrograde theme. So that's another thing that I noticed. The other thing that I noticed about the transits that occurred on the 29th of October is that transiting Mars was 4 degrees Libra, and it was conjunct Kevin Spacey's natal North Node in Libra. That is very interesting to me. So that's another thing that I noticed. And the 3rd house governs communication. The 3rd house is naturally ruled by Gemini. So Mars is a mover and shaker planet. It's got energy, it's action. So this transit is going to call action forward because the node, as I was saying, is an amplifier, and it's interacting with Mars at this time. And and that conjunction is applying right now, so it will be going on for a while, a couple more days. So the other thing I'd like to talk about here is their Davison composite. It's very fascinating to me, and that is something I really like to do with astrology, is look at a person's composite and their synastry and their Davison composite and take a look and see what's going on. So Anthony Rapp and Kevin Spacey have a Davison composite for September 10th of 1965. Now, at that time, the moon was in Pisces at 6 degrees. Saturn is retrograde at 13 degrees Pisces, and Chiron is at 20 degrees Pisces, also retrograde, and Chiron and Saturn are conjunct together. Now, Chiron is sitting in the 12th house, but Saturn and the moon are kind of sitting on the edge of the 11th house in this chart, and that cluster of those planets, which is called a stellium, they are all in opposition to the Sun, Pluto, and Uranus. So Sun, Pluto, and Uranus in Virgo and Mercury in Virgo are all opposite that whole Pisces stellium. See, let's see. We've got, oh yeah, wow. We've got Mercury opposite the moon. We've got Sun at 17 degrees Virgo, Pluto at 16 degrees Virgo, Uranus at 15 degrees Virgo, opposite Chiron, Saturn, and the moon. That's a lot of oppositions. That chart is riddled with a lot of oppositions, and oppositions are a transit that have to do with external forces combating each other. It's not necessarily an internal struggle within. It is a struggle that can affect a person within themselves, but it usually involves an outer force or another person. In this case, these are two individuals that allegedly have had a serious issue with each other. And the interesting thing is that Chiron is an asteroid, and Chiron is known as the wounded healer. When you see Chiron in a chart, it's where a person gets wounded, and what's interesting to me is that it's in the 12th house that is ruled by Neptune. Neptune, the dark side of Neptune, is secrets, poisonous secrets, and Chiron is in the 12th house in their Davison composite, and it's in Pisces, which really strengthens this rulership theme because it's in the ruling planet of Pisces that Neptune rules, and it's all in that planet. Chiron is in the 12th house, making those aspects to the 5th house, Mercury in Virgo, and the Sun, Pluto, Uranus conjunction all in the 6th house. And keep in mind, the 6th house is not just about health, it's also about work. And these two did work together, and they worked in film. And Neptune also rules film. So that's interesting to take a peek at that. And then the other thing that's very interesting to me about the Davison composite is that the Mars is 13 degrees Scorpio, and Neptune is 17 degrees Scorpio, and it's sitting in the 7th house. The 7th house is not just about relationships. It is across from the 1st house. The 1st house is about self, but the 7th house is about other people and relating to other people. And you've got Neptune, a planet that has to do with film. You know, they were working with people on film, but at the same time, there was a lot. It seems like there was some secrecy going on. Perhaps secrecy really colored this relationship between the two of them. So that is something that I noticed that really interested me. You know, just looking at, I mean, it's just very fascinating because I also looked at Anthony's chart on top of Kevin Spacey's, and when I see that the charts are on top of each other, I have one wheel here. The inner wheel is Kevin Spacey's natal chart, and the outer wheel is Anthony Rapp's chart. And what's interesting to me about this synastry is that Anthony's natal Chiron is 10 degrees Aries, and it is conjunct Kevin Spacey's south node at 6 degrees Aries, so there's a 4-degree orb. So that Chiron and that south node are conjunct, and it's in the 9th house. And then, let's see here. And that other really interesting thing to me is that the north and the south nodes are in the 1st and 7th house. Very interesting placement. Very interesting to me. And then Neptune and Jupiter are in the Sagittarius in the 5th house. and Neptune is in the 5th house of creativity, and they were creating work together, and they were working in film, so that makes sense too. The moon is also in Capricorn. His moon in Capricorn is approaching Kevin Spacey's descendant, but it's in the 6th house at 26 degrees, but it's kind of inching closer. It's not conjunct the descendant, but it's getting there. It's in the 6th house. So I'm just laying out the synastry that's going on with their charts. So it's very interesting to me to look at all of this. And, you know, I wrote some more notes down about this because it's a very intense topic. You know, all these sex predator allegations coming out in Hollywood are really being influenced by the current Jupiter and Scorpio in transit. And I really feel that we're gonna see more people coming out with stuff about this. And I truly do feel that everything that's been happening right now has been influencing Anthony to come and speak out about this. You know, what's been going on with Bill Cosby, Weinstein. It's really been upsetting people a lot, and more people are getting brave, and they're speaking out about this, and they're not pushing it under the rug. They're realizing that they have a voice and that they're being heard, and it's not okay anymore to be treated like this. And these issues are being highlighted in astrology when you study the archetypes and the planets. I'm going to get into all that more. I could easily make another video and get into more information, but so what's interesting to me is that, you know, the South Node being in Kevin Spacey's 7th house currently, you know, that has to South Node has to deal with a person's past dealings, and right now that's being revealed to other people, and the 7th house relates to other people. It can also relate to how somebody relates to people. It's the person's relationships, and he is speaking about his relationships with men and saying that he wants to live the rest of his life as a gay man. So it's interesting to me that the South Node was transiting his 7th house at this time, as the node serves as an amplifier in astrology. You know, North Node is currently conjunct natal Mercury for Spacey, and then, you know, it's just so interesting that it was on his natal Mercury retrograde, and the secret came out at this time with that node conjuncting it. So, yeah, you know, and then transiting Uranus has been on his Aries moon. That's another big transit that's been going on. And, you know, Uranus is about surprises and radical events happening. And when it's at the midheaven, it's going to color themes that relate to the public because it's in the 10th house. And it's also relating to how people see him, because the midheaven is a person's image and how society sees them. The ascendant also has to do with how a person sees you. But when you're a famous celebrity, your 10th house is a pretty important house to look at in astrology, and the midheaven as well, especially for a public figure such as Kevin Spacey. You know, just the moon currently being conjunct to Chiron and Pisces really does give this a more emotional tone. And, you know, there's just so much going on with this. You know, it's just so sad when these things come out. And if this did happen to Anthony, my heart breaks for him. It's very sad, but it's also, you know, it's interesting for me as an astrologer to take a look at this and see what's going on. And I'm looking at more transits that I wrote down. I have a lot of notes here, so let's see. So another thing that I think that could be very interesting, if we're going to talk in predictive astrology terms. So as I was saying before, Anthony natally has the sun in Scorpio, and he also has Venus in Scorpio. And in 1986, there was a Venus retrograde in Scorpio. The next Venus retrograde in Scorpio is going to occur on October 4th, 2018. And that will mark almost a year that he has come out and talked about this. And I feel like that Venus going retrograde in Scorpio is going to be a really big cycle that's either completed, or there's going to be a new cycle that opens up for him regarding this issue. And I do think that it's going to relate to this. And I do wonder what else is going to come out of the woodwork now that Anthony has come forward. I'm very curious to find out when this alleged event occurred back in 1986, but astrologically speaking, and looking at those synodic cycles and looking at that Venus retrograde, it really does interest me that Spacey was indeed born during a Venus retrograde shadow, and that in 1986 there was a Venus retrograde. And that Venus retrograde was at the exact degree of Anthony's natal Venus retrograde in Scorpio. Yeah, so this is just very fascinating for me. I really feel that this cycle, this Venus retrograde cycle that's going to be coming up next year, will either be a completion for him, or he's going to undergo a really huge shift, or maybe an emotional breakthrough in relation to these kinds of issues and feelings. And when in October next year, when Venus goes retrograde in Scorpio, on October 4th, it'll be interesting to see what goes on in Anthony's life, or if more things come out. I'm just really curious to see. Yeah, so that's something that's very interesting to me. Yeah, I mean, also Anthony's Mars being conjunct to Spacey's natal Chiron with that 2-degree orb really fascinates me too. The composite chart's very interesting to me as well. I mean, what's also very interesting is that Anthony's Sun in Scorpio conjuncts Spacey's Neptune in Scorpio, and it's a conjunction that is applying with a 2-degree orb. And when planets are in orb, that means how many degrees are the planets apart when they're making a transit. And in this case, it's applying, which means it's gathering more and more potential. Think of it as like a snowball rolling down the hill. It's gathering more intensity, it's getting bigger and brighter. So that means that those planets are moving closer and closer together, which does change the influence of how it's impacting people. So that's very interesting to me, because, you know, the Sun is a light in astrology. It's considered one of the lights, and it's conjuncting Kevin Spacey's Neptune, and Neptune governs secrecy. It governs deception, whether you're lying to yourself or you're lying to other people. You know, the Sun is a light. It is shining a light on those secrets, and there's that Sun-Neptune conjunction right there. And we're seeing how it's manifesting, that transit between the two of them, how it's manifesting. It's very interesting. The other thing is that Anthony's Venus and his Mercury are conjunct Spacey's Jupiter. That's also very interesting to me, because Jupiter is about expansion. It's about things growing and growing. Very interesting. So that would make me, you know, I mean, objectively speaking, if his Venus and his Mercury are conjunct his Spacey's Jupiter, that could cause attraction and synastry. I mean, that's, you know, that could cause some chemistry and attraction, having a transit like that. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. I'm just speculating here. I'm not taking sides. I'm speculating on an astrological level. I'm just wanting to make that clear. Yeah, it just really does interest me that Anthony's Neptune falls in Spacey's 5th house and conjuncts his Sun. That very much interests me. Yeah, and you know, what I'd like to do that really would interest me is that what I would really like to do with this is I would like to get the Davison composite and put it on top of both of their charts, and I'm going to do that in a part 2 video, and I'm going to get into more information about this, because there is more information and more is going to be coming out over the next few days. And you know, I really thank all of you for listening. I really hope that you learned from this and that you found the video interesting, and I'm grateful for the people that are listening, and I'm grateful to the Peace Dealer for letting me share this video on his page. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful Halloween, and blessed be. Bye.